Now just sit back and get ready to meet a really remarkable young man, Norris Frederick, a living tribute to the power of love, determination, and Childhaven.
So I was told growing up that you can become a product of your environment. And if that's true today, then I don't know what I'm doing here in front of you guys. I grew up in Seattle to a single parent being raised by a single mother raising 4 children, in a house where beatings were more common than breakfast, and a father being drunk was more common than a father being present. And where the temptation for me to act out, run away, go astray, was much stronger than the temptation of me succeeding and the expectations of me doing well in school. If you add these kind of things into their life and the kind of experiences that I had involving racial discrimination, gang violence, disappointment, loss, and even death in my family, it was the recipe for failure for me. The product of that environment today would be in jail. He even might be dead, or at the very least, he'd be one messed up kid. He wouldn't have been a star high school athlete. He would have never been a student leader. He would have never attended the University of Washington on a full athletic scholarship. He would have never had earned a degree in computer science and another one in marketing. He would have never been one of the most decorated athletes in Washington state history. He also would have never been an 11-time NCAA All-American or trained for the Olympic Games in 2008 and 2012. Or earned a job as an assistant coach at the University of California, Los Angeles. And there's never going to be, or there is no way that this guy, at the age of 27, have lived his entire life a non-drinker, a non-drug user, someone who works really hard, who loves his family, and still manages to dream big. The product of that environment, I don't think that that's me. I prefer to look at myself as the product of my potential. I was just 2 years old. I was just 2 years old when I came to Childhaven with my older brother Gregory. Because I was so small, my memory is a bit fuzzy. But one thing that I do remember, it was one place where I could have 2 solid meals each day, breakfast and lunch. In a household where alcoholism ruled the day, meals were often hard to come by. I also remember being a handful of trouble. Sorry. There was a substitute teacher in my time at Childhaven, and her name was Alicia Roper. She told me that she remembers me being scary and angry, and I would act out. But what she also told me was that I was funny, I was caring, and I was full of contradictions. Swearing up a blue streak one moment, crawling into her lap the next moment, asking her to read me a story. Alicia told me that I was really, really slow to trust, but once I trusted you, I'd be loyal to you forever. Being at Childhaven was definitely different than being at home. Even though I was rowdy and angry and still chose to act out, my teachers never responded with me in anger, or a slap, or the snap of a belt. They were calm and kind, and it was the first place I remember being outside of home, or being outside of my family as well, where people cared so much about me and what I could be and what I was destined to be, and they never treated me in the moment. My mother brought me and my brother to Childhaven back in the early 1980s, or late 1980s, early 1990s, because she struggled at home, and she struggled to do what was best for us. No matter how bad things got at home, I never doubted that my mom loved me. and she did what was best for her family with the means that she had. I've always had more respect and more admiration for my mom than I can ever put into words. My father was a kind and generous man, and he would have did everything he possibly could to help his family, even if it meant for him to go to jail in hopes that it would help support. But when it came to him drinking, he just became a different individual, a violent individual. It was awful that somebody that I loved so much could be so affected by something that I hated so much, and that was the alcohol. My dad would get into terrible fights with my mother, and he was never slow to raise his hand to me and my older brothers. Every time that there was an argument, I knew for a fact that somebody was going to get beat up. At the very least, I knew somebody was going to walk away hurt. For a long time, that's how I thought that's what life was. I thought it was typical in every household. All the way until I got to 6th grade. I went to Eckstein Middle School, and I met a friend at the time. His name was Danny Sherrard, and he soon became my best friend afterwards. He would invite me over to his house on Saturdays to stay the night. I remember one Saturday morning, it wasn't like other Saturdays. I walked downstairs, walked into the kitchen, and his mother had made us breakfast, an English muffin with an egg and a sausage. That wasn't common in my house, so everything was just different. Didn't make any sense, but I thought it was cool. I remember picking up my breakfast and walking into the living room, and I sat down and watched TV. Danny was still upstairs asleep. I remember hearing his parents starting to argue. It got louder and louder. Then I heard the footsteps of Danny walking down the street or down the stairs. He walked into the kitchen and got his food and came out and sat right next to me as if nothing was going on. I remember turning to Danny and saying, "Danny, I think that we should leave." He looked at me and said, "For what?" I said, "Well, your mom and dad are arguing, and I don't want to see your dad beat your mom up." And he turned to me and said, "That's not how it happens." I looked at him and I was like, "I'm pretty sure that's how it happens." He told me that they were going to sit down, talk about it, and offer to take us to ice cream later. I once again told him that's not what's going to happen either. What he was saying to me actually didn't even make any sense. I had seen this movie so many times, I knew the outcome. But that's exactly what happened. When we got to the ice cream place, his parents sat me down and asked me questions. They asked me questions about my family, questions I wasn't ready for. They asked me, when my parents get upset, do they hit each other? It was embarrassing. It hurt me, and I took offense to it. But then again, I did answer them yes, because that's all that I knew. The more they asked, the more upset and angry I got. And now looking back at it now, the only thing I did was prove them right. That day I realized that my life wasn't so typical after all. You might think that growing up in Seattle, Washington 20 years ago, that racism wasn't such a big deal here as it is in other places. Well, you'd be wrong. There was a lot of racism in my elementary school. There were a lot of weapons, gangs, even at a young age. I got into fights, I got into trouble, but being disciplined or suspended or even threatened with expulsion, it wasn't a threat to me. What could be worse than what I was going through at home as a young kid? In the 4th grade, I attended West Willen Elementary School, and there was a principal by the name of Mr. Wells who brought me into his office and threatened expulsion. I told him, "I don't care what you do. Go on and expel me. What's the worst that you can possibly do? You've walked me home once this year and watched my dad beat the hell out of me on the patio." Do what you have to do. Mr. Wells was a black guy, so I had a different type of respect for him. I treated him differently. I respected him. I didn't want guidance, but guidance is what I needed. He looked at me and said, "You're screwing up. And before you're 16 years old, if you're not behind bars, before you're 16 years old, if you're not behind bars, then you'll probably be dead." What he said to me finally sunk in. The answer wasn't violence anymore. All the fighting needed to stop. I didn't want to go to prison. I didn't want to be the screw up with no future that so many people in my life had told me that I'd end up. That day, Mr. Wells made a difference in my life. And so did a few other people. Remember Alicia? When she left Childhaven shortly after I did, she came and asked my mom if she could see me on the weekends. Her and I had a special type of connection, and she soon became my godmom afterwards. She would come to my house and put up charts, and every time I read a book, she'd give me a gold star. After a certain amount of gold stars, after a certain number of gold stars, she would take me to Fred Meyer, and she let me pick out any toy that I wanted to. You guys can laugh, it's okay. She'd pick me up on the weekends and take me to lunch. She'd take me to the zoo. But everything we did was always education focused. One thing that I've always admired about Alicia, she didn't look like me, she didn't dress like me, she didn't talk like me, and she sure didn't relate to me like my father did when he got upset. Instead, Alicia would sit me down and tell me things like, "I'm disappointed in you." When those words came out of her mouth, I'd rather her had taken off a belt and hit me. I never heard those words before, so it hurt. My relationship with Alicia was the first time that I had ever trusted somebody that wasn't black. And she's been in my life ever since. In middle school, I started playing basketball, and by the time I got to Roosevelt High School, I was a freshman playing on the varsity basketball team. But I was still angry and chose to act out. My history teacher, Mr. Barnes, had a stuttering problem. And every time he would get mad, his face would turn red, and I would take that time to make fun of him. It didn't take long for him to put his foot down. In front of the entire class, he took it out on me. Mr. Barnes told me, "You think you're a hero because you can dribble a ball? You're nothing but a clown. And if you don't realize that now, then you'll never make anything of yourself." The second week of high school changed my entire life. For the next 4 years, I had more respect for Mr. Barnes than I had for anybody else in my entire life. He wasn't a teacher anymore to me. He wasn't those types of teachers that would push me through the system just to get them out of my way. Mr. Barnes challenged me, and he cared for me, and I knew he'd always be there for me if I needed anything. Like the time when I got upset with my mom and used a swear word and my mom told me to leave. I had nobody else to call, so I called Mr. Barnes. And him and his wife opened up their home to me. Or when I started being recruited, Mr. Barnes chose to go on recruiting trips to make sure that they put Okay, we got it. Mr. Barnes will go on recruiting trips with me to make sure that they put my education first and my athletic accolades second. I'm honored today to tell you guys that Alicia and Mr. Barnes are here today, along with my mother, my lovely mother, Darlene. And I want to tell them in front of everybody just how much I love them and care for them and how much they've helped me. If you three people would please stand up so we can give you an applause. By the time that I graduated high school, I'd gotten into track and field. It wasn't like basketball. I didn't have a team of 5 other people to help me out when I couldn't pick up the slack for myself. My success in track and field was solely dependent on me. If I wanted something great to happen, I had to put in the legwork. But if something went wrong, I had nobody else to blame but myself. I won 5 state championships in just 3 years while I was in high school. I broke every high school record that there was. I was named the best track and field athlete in the entire country by my senior year. I qualified for my first world championship team as a teenager, as a senior in high school, where I placed 11th and 7th in the world in my 2 events, the high jump and the long jump. I had my pick at any college in the entire country with a full athletic scholarship. And when I signed with the University of Washington, I felt like I owned the world. But just 1 month into my freshman year, I remember my dorm room phone ringing. It was my mom calling me, and I had never heard her cry like that before in my life. And she kept saying that there was an emergency and that I needed to come home. Without any question, I got in my roommate's car and I left. The entire drive, I was just telling myself, please let there be nothing going on with my mom or just my little brother. Anything else I can handle. I remember pulling up to the driveway at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I saw that every light in the house was on. And I also saw my mom sitting in the backyard, holding herself, rocking, crying. I asked no questions. I just hugged her and told her everything was going to be okay. And she looked at me and said, "Norris, your father's been stabbed to death by his girlfriend." I've told you that my father was a violent drunk and that he served time in jail, that he had beaten me and my mom and my brothers. But what I didn't tell you guys is how much I loved him. My father was a good man with an even better heart, but just a bad problem. And as far as my 3 brothers, they weren't his kids by blood, but he took care of them. And when he wasn't drinking, he was funny and giving, and he would tell me things like, "Be better than me." There were so many times where I didn't like my father, but there was never a time where I didn't love him. After my dad was killed, I felt myself shutting down. I didn't care about track and field. I didn't care about academics. I didn't care about anything at that point. I remember the next few days, I tried to push through it. I went to practice that Monday, and I showed up just trying to go through the motions as if nothing happened. And we had a volunteer coach that looked at me. And the only thing she had to say were 3 words to make me give everything up. So I stormed out. I headed back to my dorm room. I was going to pack all of my things. I was done. I remember walking back and asking myself, maybe everybody was right. Maybe I wouldn't amount to anything. Or maybe I just didn't care at the end of the day. Then the head track and field coach, Greg Metcalf, showed up at my dorm room with the support of my mom behind him. They sat me down on my bed and told me that they weren't going to let me quit, that they wouldn't give up on me, and they wouldn't let me give up on myself. I could clearly see in their eyes that they believed in me, and they weren't about to stop letting me believe myself. That was the first time since my father's death that I actually shed a tear. My coach grabbed my shoulder, and he said, "Norris, if it takes you 6 years to graduate from this university, I'll pay out of my own pocket." He reminded me that he wasn't going to let me be a failure. He told me I wasn't going to be behind bars. And then he said he would never let me be a product of my environment. I looked at him and I said, "Coach, don't make promises to me that you don't mean, or ones that you can't keep. I've had enough broken promises in my life." He looked at my mom and said, "Darlene, I'll take care of your son as if he were my own." He looked at me and said, "You take all the time you need, but don't give up on me, because I'd never give up on you." I took a few months. I tried my best to deal with my father's death. And then when I went back to practice, the very first meet of my entire college career, I had the #1 jump in the world for 5 months recorded by any human being on the face of this planet. All the anger that I kept inside and let build up, I finally found a release for it. My life actually changed that day. I had a future. I had things to lose. And I had things to work for. And as far as Coach Metcalf, for the next 4 years, he held up his end of the bargain. He treated me just like one of his sons. During my college career, I had a career that many young men would only dream about. Records broken, honors, awards, so many different opportunities. Although I was always proud of what I achieved, I was always looking for my next win. And when it came to the Olympics and training for the Olympics, I gave everything that I had. I sacrificed everything. I competed all over the planet, and I also won all over the planet. I was sure that in 2012, I'd make my first Olympic team. I fell short just by 2 inches. 2 inches. You know, but that's just how track and field is. And that's how life is as well. We measure our progress on our path in inches. A mother who loves you and believes in you, you can move forward a few inches. A godmother who teaches you how to trust, you can move forward a few more inches. A difficult home, a death in your family, a death of your father, fall back a few inches. A caring teacher and a coach who will not let you give up under any circumstance, inch forward just a few more steps. A new job, getting paid to do what you love to do, inch further down that pathway. More training, higher hopes, bigger dreams. The 2016 Olympic Games are just inches down my pathway. The product of my environment? I don't think so, not anymore. I like to look at myself as a product of my potential. Thank you guys for listening to me. And I know you've heard all about my story. There are hundreds of children right now at Childhaven whose lives have already set them back a few inches. Children who've experienced further or worse than I ever had. Neglect that would actually break your heart. Abuse that we couldn't tolerate. But thanks to Childhaven and people like you, they will not become a product of their environment. They will not be harmed with the negative experiences that their lives has marked them out to be at this moment. The children at Childhaven today, thanks to generous people like you guys, have unlimited potential to rise above their experiences and environments and to reach for the stars. I did, and I know that they can too. They just need you to help them inch down that pathway. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being here for the children of Childhaven.